Hello everybody, welcome to another of our Why Study series. Today I'm with Tom O'Loughlin and I'm asking him the question, why study Boethius? So Tom, tell us something about Boethius. Who was he, first of all, and then why was he important?
Boethius was a late Roman statesman. He worked for Theodoric, who was one of the first of the German rulers of the Roman Empire. He spent a lot of his life in northern Italy and some of it in Constantinople. And he's one of the theologians who has been very influential on Latin theology that almost no one has heard of. He was born in 480, and he's born into an upper-class senatorial family. He belongs to the old Roman aristocracy, but he's a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the last people who, working as a high-level civil servant, ambassador type guy, is learned in both Latin and Greek. Eventually he falls out of favour with Theodoric and he's imprisoned, and in 525 he's put to death in an agonising way. It's a judicial execution. But you could almost call it in a period of a breakdown of law and order. He was bumped off.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's famous for two separate reasons. While he is awaiting execution, he writes one of the great classics of prison literature, known as The Consolation of Philosophy. And there he reflects on his own life, and he reflects on fate, and he reflects on how power is used in the world and what is the destiny of the human being. And it's a dialogue between him and Dame Philosophy, and it produces some of the loveliest late Latin poetry ever written. And so he was studied down the years just for the creation of this beautiful story. And then people ask, well, why is there no reference to religion? And it's part of a long tradition of philosophical reflection on why do bad things happen to good people? Why does fate seemingly toss of the coin and you're top civil servant one day, you're in prison and awaiting execution the next? But the interesting thing is that is not what makes him famous within theology. At the same time that he's a civil servant, he has this great plan that the whole of Greek learning now needs to be translated into Latin. And he is aware that in Latin there are not handy textbooks that give the technical vocabulary that Latin Christians will need to tackle the problems of Christian faith as it emerges from the century, just a century and a quarter roughly, between the Council of Nicaea in 325 and the Council of Chalcedon in 351. These two, in the period between these two councils, in Greek, an amazingly elaborate language emerges for talking about who is Jesus, the two natures and the one person in Jesus, then the three persons in the one God relating to the Trinity, and what do we mean by person, nature, time, eternity? Boethius, in the 5 tractates, but particularly in the ones relating to the Trinity, gives Latin theology a very simple language. And this becomes the standard jargon until the 19th century.
And he's still very much read today, isn't he? He's on the syllabuses still.
He's still read. If you want to understand what later Latin theology means when it uses the technical language of Christology or Trinity, you have to read Boethius. And we are all familiar with many of his definitions. For instance, the definition of the human person that will be used until the Reformation is the individual substance of a rational nature. The definition of eternity, the complete possession of everything at once. All of these go back to Boethius, and people like Aquinas, we all know that he wrote commentaries on Aristotle. There's major studies on how he used Augustine, how he used Ambrose, how he used all the great fathers. But we forget that he also wrote commentaries on Boethius. One of his books gets a later name called the Hebdomadibus, and the commentary on Boethius on the Trinity and the Hebdomadibus, these are the technical textbooks of the Latin tradition. So he's one of those guys you've never heard of, but you're using his jargon every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.